such a pleasure to come to this. I've had a bit of a tricky personal situation at the moment, so I was hoping to come yesterday, stay till tomorrow, and I've not been able to because I have to be in a hospital. So I'm really pleased. I got a lift from Tom this morning, bless him, and I'm pleased to talk about this issue with you all, because I know one thing I don't have to convince you all is the benefit of nature. I don't have to do any of that. You all know how important nature is for food systems. I do a lot of talks about bugs, and I have to sort of explain to people what invertebrates, if you're an entomologist, you might be annoyed with me calling them bugs, but it's an easy term to use. Invertebrates is my background. I should give you a bit of a background before I start, actually. So I'm currently the strategic lead on agriculture at the Wildlife Trusts. Not very good at doing slides, as you can see. I've cut off some words there. But I've basically spent 35 years working on farm and food policy at various organisations like Friends of the Earth, Sustain. But the reason I started doing that was because I was doing, I did a biology degree, and then I did a master's in pest management, which was, I was looking in my thesis on leaf miners and leaf miner control, and using biological controls. So I was looking at work in that area, and then I realized I didn't want to kill bugs, because that was the majority of the work, was about finding ways to kill invertebrates, and I loved invertebrates. So I did something else and ended up Friends of the Earth, and the rest is history. So that's my background. At the Wildlife Trusts, so I work on policy. For those of you who don't know, the Wildlife Trust is actually 47 separate charities. A governance nightmare if you're into charity governance. All with their own boards and a board of trustees, all their own strategies. But they're brilliant. At a local level, they have such great partnerships and local reach. Some of them are big, some of them are very small. They've got a lot of staff, an awful lot of volunteers. They've got a huge program of engaging a huge range of people and communities, and they're really, really strong on getting more diverse communities involved in nature conservation, and thinking about food systems that are good for nature. And I think they're a great organisation because they have that real local punch. But they also have 250 farm advisors. And those farm advisors will help farmers, sometimes voluntarily. They can get paid by another fund or corporate, like a water company, to support farmers in doing things more for nature. And they do incredible work doing that. I go around some farms with them every year, and talking to the farmers. The last one we went to John Pawsey's farm, which some of you might know in Suffolk. He's a combinable crops, but brilliant organic farmer. But they work with non-organic farmers as well to get them to understand the benefits of a nature-based farming system. And so that's a really amazing resource, threatened right now by policy, but at the moment. And they also have reserves, and they have farms as well where they demonstrate good practice. And I've produced a few reports, and they're all available on our website, about the kind of things we do and the things we're interested in. But what I was going to say, as Bea said, bugs and policy, this is what we're going to discuss. I'll try and do more on bugs. This is actually a gypsy moth that came into my kitchen a few years ago, and my son just captured the picture in my hand, which I think, for me, encapsulates what we have to think about, nurturing these invertebrates. And having just been in this talk previously about propagation and the very big problems related to invertebrates as well, obviously there can be a real problem for organic growers, and we talk about that, but we also have to nurture them for the many reasons I'm sure you know. So I just like this picture. And again, I don't really have to go through this with you lot, but it's worth talking about the way in which we need to think about farming as a multifunctional system. Again, you all know this. Multidimensional, below ground, above ground, but also the whole levels, maximising the solar impact, maximise the opportunities for nature to do its thing. I was just talking to somebody earlier today about growing maize in my tiny, tiny garden in London. I live in Hackney in London. And doing the Three Sisters system, where you've got squash, beans, and corn. And that sort of encapsulates the example of using the maximum dimension, although obviously it go higher with your bushes, with your trees. But that kind of approach is increasingly being talked about, and I think it's really exciting. Anybody who goes to Groundswell will know. It's also got very corporate from the early days, but it is a huge amount of brilliant farmers learning, and farmers who have not done any of this before, coming to Groundswell, coming to the other organic and regen conferences and events around the country. I think it's a really exciting time. And they're learning about the fact that everything works together, and it's a complex system which can't be fixed by single things. And that's what you all know already. But I think this also encapsulates the role of invertebrates, which I love, doing their thing, both in terms of pollination and all that thing above ground, and pest control. They are incredibly important pest control. You know, we're talking about billions of pounds of pest control invertebrates do for farmers globally every year, as well as many billions of pounds of pollination services. But they also do all the nutrient recycling services, which again, you will know very well, breaking down plant matter in the soil and above ground to make it more available for the microbes to break down. And so this, I think, is multi-actor as well, because you're talking about all the beings above and below ground, but also multi-actor because it's got to include you as farmers and growers, you as sellers, the supply chain, the marketeers and the advertisers, and the consumers, the eaters. I like to call them eaters rather than consumers, because consumers is another thing altogether. But that's why I think it's multi-actor. And where campaigns and NGOs fall down, I think, is where they only pick one part of the system. And it's very difficult to campaign on a complex system, as we know. So you pick one particular problem, like pesticides or GM or nature or climate, and you focus on that because that's the way to give a relatively simple comms campaign. But we know that those fail. What's really exciting at the moment is the growth of this kind of movement where people are understanding the role of organic farming and organic growing and regenerative growing, but where it sits within the supply chain as well, thinking about all those actors beyond the farm gate. I'll talk a bit about that later. But so multi-actor, multi-dimensional, multifunctional, multi-everything, basically. Anyway, on to bugs. I did wonder how I could do bugs in a very short amount of time, because, again, I also wonder how I do it, given that you all know probably an awful lot more than I do about the best way to boost the beneficial bugs and manage the nuisances, the ones that are vector for diseases, the ones that are eating your brassicas, etc. And obviously, these are ones that you love. These are the solitary bees. You've got a four-banded flower bee, a fork-tailed flower bee. I think I can make that move, actually, that one. No, I can't. Oh, there we go. It's digging its... No, it's not going to Wi-Fi, maybe. Oh, yeah, there we go. It's digging its nest in a fence post in Epping Forest. It's fork-tailed bumblebee, which you might not spot very many of them, and I was so excited to find this one. And then that's the hairy-footed flower bee on the right there, which has got really hairy back legs in order to capture pollen. I think that is, maybe it's, yeah, I should know that. Anyway, the thing about invertebrates is that there's so many, hundreds and thousands of species in one area alone, and millions of species globally. And I think of the 1 million that we've identified, there's another 5 million that we've not, is the estimate. So there's a huge amount of invertebrates that are out there, probably in the UK, but definitely globally, that we don't know. And if we don't know them, you could argue that's a good thing, because if we know them, we'll start to zap them somehow. But if we do know them, then we can help them. So there's a lot of concerns, obviously, globally about the state of invertebrates. And if we don't know what's out there, we can easily kill them without knowing that we're killing them. I'm sorry, I'll go to the next slide. No. No. Yeah, just to go on to this bit, so just to talk about that, there's, in the UK, huge amount of crisis in invertebrates. Although this year, actually, for the first time ever, people have been messaging me that saying they're finding bug splatters on their windscreens. It's been a pretty good year for some invertebrates, but overall the trend is horrendous. The trend is completely in the wrong direction. In the UK, BugLife and WWF have done analysis showing 17 species are lost just from the East region only, 25 threatened, another 31 of concern. Globally, 40% of the species are expected to go extinct. And obviously that has such an important role in terms of all of wildlife because they're such an important part of the food system. They're at the trophic part of the food system. There's some lovely bugs in this tent at the moment, actually, I've noticed. This is, as I said, a huge risk to the food chain for all our other lovely species that we like to have around that are important for our well-being, but they're also such critical actors within the system, as I've been talking about multifunctionality. And, you know, for natural services, pollination, above-ground pest control, below-ground plant animal decomposition, nutrient cycling. One of the things I should have mentioned, I've also written a book, and I've got a couple of copies here, which I'm happy to give away to the best questions. I'll sign it. This book, I talk about the role of earthworms in transporting microbes. They're like the freight, taking microbes on their surface and within their stomach from one soil to another. And nematodes will be doing that as well, but earthworms are really good at doing that, moving things from one place to another. So when I've listed all these things they do, there's a million more other things they do. And I love that one about them being, you know, freight train for the microbial spores, the fungal spores that are needed to keep soil live, full of microbes. And obviously the nutrient cycling, they're breaking down a lot of matter, you know, the earthworms breaking it down and their feces then available for the microbes to break it down further, make it bioavailable for your plants to grow, and if you've got animals as well, for the animals to eat those plants. Obviously, there's a few pollutant-tolerant species that are doing quite well. Funnily enough, in our water systems in the UK, some of the species are doing quite well, which you'd think right now they really wouldn't because the water system is there. But they're actually benefiting from a lot of that nutrients. But it's a very narrow band and not what we need. We need diversity and numbers. So I'm going to try and go backwards now. Oh, lost it. Oh dear. That's weird. Lost the, that is odd. I've lost these slides, so. Can anybody help me here? Bottom. No, next one. Thank you. So sorry about that. I'm trying to go backwards and I'm not being very, there we go. Yeah. Nope. Going back. I'm going forwards, aren't I? I have to go, yeah, I'll start again. There we go. I'm very sorry about this. So I just wanted to just quickly cover that because then talk about the beneficial things that they can do. Sorry. Dear, this is incompetence of the highest degree, isn't it? There we go. Encouraging beneficial bugs in horticulture. And just by listening to the last talk, I know you are doing this anyway, but it's worth just repeating. Obviously, diverse cropping, intercropping, having crops in between other crops, you know all this, having longer rotations, companion cropping, and I heard a phrase today which I hadn't heard earlier, which was to do with using an aubergine to provide a host for the prey of pest predators. And you lose the aubergine plant, but you get a lot of pest predators. So it had a particular word, and I've forgotten it already in the heat. I'm a big fan of agroforestry. Provides a huge amount of habitats above and below ground for invertebrates. You're going to get loads more beneficial insects. You're providing nesting sites. You're providing mating sites. You're providing refuges. Any shrubs or trees that you provide on site. Again, I'm talking to the converted. Making space for nature. Beetle banks. It was funny, we were talking, in this, I keep referring to the talk earlier about propagation, whether you need beetle banks within propagation things to eat the flea beetles, because I know beetles are brilliant at eating flea beetles, and other beetles are great eating slugs, so putting favourable conditions for beetles is probably a good thing, but there are also other beetles that are a nuisance, as we know. But flower margins, wonderfully important for your invertebrates, so I'm sure you're all doing that anyway. There's a wonderful study I talked about in the book about orchards, and where orchards, you know, many orchards are incredibly intensive, nature-free, apart from the very intensely reared, bred trees. And I've been to visit a few of these, and yes, they're wonderful, they're producing fruit, but there's no nature around. And yet studies have shown if you have flower below and flower-rich margins, and more margins than maybe you'd think, you're going to get a huge amount more pollination and better cropping and more pest control. So having those in orchards is a good thing. And obviously looking at locally adapted varieties and locally bred varieties, and thinking about the way in which you choose your varieties of fruit and veg. I'm sure, again, you're doing this already. Building soil organic matter, critical. Obviously, invertebrates are a vitally important part of that, but also important, obviously, critically for the health of your plant. The one thing I always wanted people to be more aware of is springtails, and I meant to get a picture of one. I'm afraid I haven't got one, but has anybody seen a picture of a springtail? Yeah. I mean, they're so beautiful. I think there should be a Pixar film of them. But I think they're also one of the, unexpected heroes of the soil. People know about earthworms, and that's great, and we need earthworms protected. They're really at risk from climate change. Again, there's research in my book talking about that. Their habitats are changing, both in terms of availability of water, too much water, and temperatures. It's really critical for all the invertebrates because they have such a large surface area to volume ratio, so they heat up quickly. And they lose water easily, and their system of breathing is through tubes, most of them, through tubes in their skin and their exoskeleton. And so you can imagine they are particularly vulnerable to changes in temperature and changes in air condition and availability of oxygen. But also they very easily get drowned if they're not in their aquatic phase, which a lot of insects have an aquatic phase. Obviously, no chemicals, and peat I'll talk a bit about peat later, but obviously it's a critically important resource that we need to keep in the ground. We should not be digging peat up for horticulture. It's incredibly important carbon source. The more we take peat up or degrade it, the more it releases greenhouse gases, and that's, as the Climate Change Committee is saying over and over again, we need to stop doing that. And we've been waiting many years for a peat ban, a ban on using peat for commercial purposes. And right now, while I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago, we're expecting it in the next few weeks, but having been disappointed many, many times over, and as we all know, we've been disappointed many times over on policy. For instance, the National Action Plan on Pesticides, that was 7 years overdue. The peat ban is almost as long overdue. We've been promised it, but we need to have it to keep the peat in peat soils, keep the peat, re-wet the peat, so it saves the carbon in those soils. They're really, really, feet. If a good peatland is many, many feet of rich, carbon-rich matter that's built up over thousands of years, but it's also got loads of fantastic species in it. Yes, please. Yeah. Yes, very pleased to see that. Mm. 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 Yes. Yeah, I know, yeah. It's insane, yes, totally insane, yeah. I talk about that in a bit. So I am actually touching on that because I'm actually more working on that, which you're talking about. The cultivation of 35% of our vegetables are cultivated on lowland peat. But the extraction is of peats in Somerset and Yorkshire, and that is damaging as well. But I do recognise there's problems with the alternatives, but you're building up a bank of knowledge. But I totally agree with you. Next slide. So this slide actually says, oh, God. Oh, dear. Anyway, I was going to ask you, I'm going too fast now. This is really annoying. I was going to ask you how many aphids. Oh, my God, I'm going mad. How many aphids does one... I don't know what I'm doing here. This is shocking, isn't it? Does one hoverfly eat a day? Anybody? Thousands. They can be... sorry. Hoverflies. They can eat thousands. These are, I love this picture. I took it on my ivy. These are actually ivy aphids, so they're probably not particularly threatened to you, but they're very cute. But hoverflies are enormous eaters of aphids, as are lacewing as are ladybirds. So those kind of species are the ones that you want to really encourage by having the right kind of flower around the crop and the right kind of refuges, so the hoverflies can not be eaten by all the birds, which I'm sure you've got in all areas, but also having things like hoverfly lagoons. On our website, we talk about how to create a hoverfly lagoon with some water in a pot, and because a lot of hoverflies that are really useful for predatory eating your aphids are actually have their early stages in water, so they'll lay their eggs near or on water, and they'll have an aquatic species. You might have seen something called a rat-tailed maggot. Anybody seen that in the water systems? Yeah, I think they're gorgeous, but they've got, you could argue they need a new name, but I said that to an entomologist, and he said, no, it's a perfect name, because they've got a tube that will allow them to breathe air, but they're in the water. They look like a maggot with a tube, with a tail, and they breathe the air, but they'll emerge as a fantastic hoverfly that will devour your unwanted aphids and other species. And there's a whole range of hoverflies which do that. And they are really, really important to cultivate, and they can make the difference between an infestation that affects your economic yields and not. And so true of all the other beetles and other species. Oh, well, really? Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. So the maggots, the rat-tailed maggots, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Somebody had somebody was putting their banana skins and other stuff in a tub that got filled with water. And she went out to check on it, and the banana skins would create a nutrient, tea. And it was full of rat-tailed maggots. And it was obviously a really good medium for rat-tailed maggots. So, and that doesn't take any space. It's a tiny amount of space, and you will have emerging from that fantastic hoverflies. But the other ones I like as well are the hornet mimic hoverflies, and they lay their eggs in wasps' nests. And I know you all love wasps, because wasps eat an awful lot of caterpillars and do wonderful things, and they're wonderful pollinators. I think a single wasp nest can eat 1.5 kilograms of caterpillars a year, because they'll take the caterpillars, macerate, they don't eat them themselves, they macerate it up and feed it to their babies back in the nest, which they only feed on nectar and really sweet stuff, which is why near the end of summer, when all the nectar-filled flowers have gone, they'll come to the picnic and try and get your jam, because they're desperate for sugar. But they don't eat the caterpillars, they feed it to the babies in the nest. And they're incredibly hard-working. I had one nest in my roof. I was just sitting there watching their work. It was amazing. Oh, sorry, yeah. The actual adults can be predators as well. Yeah, the adults too. There's a whole range of hoverfly that do different things in different ways. It's worth looking up. I know Nature Friendly Farmers Network produced, and I'm sure Soil Association produced lots of resources on what beneficial hoverflies you might have. And now with all the apps available, I use iNaturalist to identify species. Because the good thing about hoverflies is they tend to, called hoverflies, but they tend to stay still for a while. I was trying to film some hornets the other day, and they don't stay still. But the hoverflies often land on you or on your plants. They do that a lot, and you can then photograph them and ID them and find out what type you've got and find out what they were doing for you. But adults will eat as well. But they will not eat them. They'll take them for their... I'm getting confused there. But they are really, really important predators. Little I and a capital N. iNaturalist. I can show you afterwards if you want. I should put up my slides actually, because I found it really useful, but there are other apps that are available. Does anybody know what a parasitoid is? It's a horrible word. This is what I did my master's in, and I was going to talk to you about them because I knew I wouldn't be able to talk about all invertebrates, but I wanted to talk about parasitoids because they're different from parasites. Parasites live on their host and eat, skin or hair. They might, do diseases and things like that. Parasitoids are amazing because they kill the host they feed on. And I think that makes them amazing parents because basically they lay their eggs on their prey in order to make sure their eggs will hatch and have a food source immediately available. You could think of an analogy as me giving birth and immediately having giving birth in a McDonald's, if you like. That's a very bad analogy. But they're great parents. Like, you know, the wasp, you've probably seen wasp galls on oaks. And they're laying their eggs in a tree and getting the tree to provide a home and food for the emerging larvae when they emerge from the eggs. And the tree will make extra plant matter, which is the gall, and that's protecting the eggs. And when they become larvae, they'll eat the plant matter and then emerge as wasps. You've probably seen that. And so they're quite, like fleas and ticks are parasites, you know, live on you, but they won't kill you unless they transmit a disease to you, obviously. But wasps, they don't want to parent, so they get somebody else to do it. And a lot of those are really useful for us. The one I studied was a leaf miner wasp, Diglyphus, and it lay its eggs in the larvae of a leaf miner fly. You've probably seen mines through leaves of your products. And the mines, they're white lines through the leaves. And what that is either a moth or a fly has laid its eggs in the leaf, and when the egg hatches in the leaf, it starts to eat through the really rich layer of chlorophyll layer in the leaf. And I should have a picture of this actually. So it's eating through the leaf, and you're getting these mines. I use those as a great way to talk to children about insects. If there aren't any insects around, you can usually find a leaf mine somewhere, in your grass, in some weeds. And those miners can really undermine your plant's ability to absorb sunlight and create sugars and therefore create fruit or veg or whatever. And the work I was doing was in a biological control company in Suffolk, and I was trying to find something, a fly, which I could then breed up to then breed up the wasp. And it was quite a complicated setup, but I did manage to do 2 life cycles of a fly, which I found on the corn. There was loads of cornfields around where we were in Suffolk, probably on the lowland peat. And so I was taking the pupae, breeding them in cages, and then trying to get the wasp to lay in the larvae in the plants. But anyway, complicated. But that is one of your friends. A parasitoid is one of your friends. This is called the Gasteroption jaculator. And I only show it to you partly because it's very amazingly looking, but also I love its name, Gasteroption jaculator. And it's got a perfect example of the ovipositor, which people go, oh my God, that's going to sting me. It's not. That's going to lay eggs. It's going to drill a hole in that wood. What it was doing on that wood, it was actually in a wildlife reserve near me in London, and it was going along, listening with its, and smelling also with its sensors. Pheromones are a really important part of the invertebrate life cycle. It'll be smelling for maggots or eggs of a prey species in that wood. Or around that area, and it would make a hole if it needed to with its ovipositor and lay eggs on those eggs or on that larvae. And when they hatch out, they'll eat the larvae. I think it's beautiful. Some people might think it's gruesome. I think it's beautiful. So these will be doing. Oh, it's too fast. That's the problem. Sorry. Oh no, I'm not. How do I go back in this? Yeah, that's the answer, isn't it? There. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Being very stupid. This one is another example you can see of a moth larvae parasitized by a wasp. Can you see all the eggs? You might have seen this in your glass houses or on your farm. Has anybody seen something like that? Yeah? Look out for it, because I think it's fascinating. And obviously those eggs are devouring the larvae, which I think, does anybody know what larvae that is? I'm not 100%. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of species of insect. I don't know them all. I once did a talk with a guy called Hedgehog Hugh. I don't know if anybody knows Hugh Warwick. Yes, and he's brilliant on hedgehogs. And I did a talk with him once. He said, Vicki, I don't know how you do your work. I've got one species to remember. And I had to identify all these species that people were bringing up to me because they'd gone out and collected them. Very hard work. Anyway, that's my excuse for not knowing. I think it's hawk moth of some sort, but those will hatch out, eat the hawk moth, and it won't survive. So you can see how they can be a really good friend to you if you've got caterpillar problems. And it's interesting to look out for. I actually had a crab spider. I'm sure you've seen crab spiders. They don't produce webs. They have very long forearms, and they'll wait very patiently, which makes, again, them very easy to photograph. There's lots of different types of crab spiders, and the female is obviously much bigger than the male. And I watched one while it made the most exquisite triangular brood sac for its eggs. And it was so beautiful, and it stayed on that brood sac as a mother for about a week and a half. Against rain, I was protecting it a bit. I have to say I did protection, but I was watching it. I couldn't resist. I was watching it. And when the mother died, she did eventually die. She you know, they can't eat while they're protecting the brood. She fell off. And I was worried about this little samosa-shaped brood sac. It was beautiful. It was like a samosa. And so I took it and put it in one of my jars with some foliage for the spiders when they emerged. But I did notice when I put it in, I noticed there was some sort of strange little pouch in there. It didn't look like the white sacs that you usually see from spider sacs. And lo and behold, about a week later, I was in my kitchen where the jar was, and I noticed something flicking out my eye, and it was a wasp. It had emerged. It had parasitized the spider sac. Anyway, that was a wonderful experiment. Yeah, I love doing those kind of things. Obviously, I let it go. It was a parasite that had parasitized the brood sac of the spider. Interesting thing about crab spiders, plants will send out a pheromone to attract a crab spider when that plant is being attacked by a herbivorous insect. And so they will actually go, come here, come and eat these herbivorous insects on my plant. And they'll eat the flies. They'll also eat bees. I've got some fantastic pictures of crab spiders eating huge bees. But it just shows the relationship between plant and invertebrate is intricate, intimate. And if you've ever seen a hawk moth feeding through a tube of a flower, you'll see, you know, it's mechanical. Over hundreds and thousands of years, they develop these relationships. So they can actually call to each other if they need each other. Obviously, the plant stops calling for the crab spider when it wants lots of pollinating bees, because the crab spider will eat the bees. But when it's being attacked, it'll call the crab spider. Oh dear, I've talked too much, haven't I? So I've talked about this already. Big problem, which you all know about. Threats to our nutritional food security. And I talk about nutritional food security because the food we eat now is not very nutritious. 54% of the food we eat is ultra-processed, which has huge implications for our health, but also huge implications for nature and climate change, because it relies very heavily on cheap raw materials, monocultures, chemicals. But anyway, threats to our food system are many, and I haven't got time to talk about these, but you will all be very aware of it, because that's why you're being wonderful organic growers. And we know nature-based solutions work. You know they work, but they need supporting. We did a piece of work, Farming at the Sweet Spot, which showed how farmers can benefit by lower costs by using nature better. It's called Farming at the Sweet Spot. But also, I do say this frequently because people say, well, we've got to do food like this because we need to feed the world. And we don't. We've got enough food to feed 11 billion, 12 billion even. But we're using it to feed cars, biofuels. We're using it to feed animals. And 54% of it's ultra-processed foods. And some of that is discretionary foods, foods we absolutely don't need. If we sorted out the food waste and all those poor uses of food, we wouldn't need to extend our yields and push the land further. We would do it with nature in mind. So policies to support. Now, I could go on over this for a whole day, but I've just given very short things about it. We obviously need financial aid, the ELMS, and we could talk about that if you've got any questions about that, targeted for small-scale farmers as well as all farmers, but they need targeting. I'll be working with Land Workers Alliance on that over the many years, because currently, if they're area-based support, that's not very helpful for vegetable and fruit growers. Organic conversion. We need specific support for horticulture, I think, and I started that because I know Wales is doing some really interesting stuff, so it's worth looking to Wales and learning from there. We need supply chain fairness. This is something I've worked on for many years. I can't talk about in detail. It's a huge area, legislation, action, and diversification and better traders. So we need to make the supermarkets behave when they're buying from farmers and growers. But we also need to build up alternative routes to market and the infrastructure between the farmer and the alternative outlet. And that's a huge amount of investment needed. I think there's investment available, but we just need to get it right and direct it in the right way. Obviously, training, skills, demonstration, and farmer-led research needs support, needs the kind of policies. And Adopt is here. Tom from Adopt is here. I don't know if he's in the room. Yeah, there he is. Encouraging all of you to go for Adopt funds, which is farmer-led trials of new approaches, which are good for the environment, good for you, good for your business. Infrastructure support and procurement. People often say, oh, if we got procurement, you know, of organic or good, healthy produce, that would be a brilliant thing. It would, but it's still a very tiny amount of the food we eat. It's, you know, sort of, I think, 7% of the food we eat. So it's important, and it can help to provide a market for farmers to go into schools and hospitals to diversify where they sell. And that is doing brilliant things in many parts of the country. But we need everything else as well. We need the kind of support that will make our supply chain much fairer. But overall, we also need massive shifts in diets, what people eat. We can't do sort any of the problems out of climate change, of nature loss, and we're one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world. Going for intensification, genetic modification, more chemicals, even more targeted chemicals, all those are actually really bad for nature. So we need to really change what people are eating. And it won't stop them taking their children to school. It won't stop them being able to live their lives. It just means changing what they eat, eating more fruit and veg, more pulses, less and better meat and dairy, and obviously eliminating food waste. We shouldn't have any food waste at all. And I've run out of time to talk about, I was going to do, a report we did with the Soil Association and Sustain about what needs to happen in horticulture. We launched it a couple of years ago, and it's got a whole strategy, really, really full of really good things, which we're pressing the government and Sustain, who's here, Georgina from Sustain is here, pressing the government for that. But I just want to talk about one particular area that I was focused on in this report, which is on lowland peat. Because as I said, 35% of the veg we eat is on lowland peat. Lowland peat soils are some of the most perfect for growing vegetables, leeks, celery, carrots, because you produce the perfect product. It looks perfect. It's really friable, wonderful soils, really easy to use, and yet it's degrading those lowland peat soils, which are an incredibly important carbon sink, particularly in the Fens, but also Lancashire, but it's particularly around the Fens and East Anglia where we've got a big problem. And there's a lot going on. The government are doing a lot of trials, which is funding a lot of trials. Wildlife Trusts are involved in those trials, growing crops, not only vegetable crops, by re-wetting the soil. You can re-wet the peatland soil by changing the water system, changing the drainage, which is actually, there's no easy way to do that. Whenever I talk to people about this, they say, that's not going to be easy. Water, water, water. It's all about water for vegetables, obviously. But we're doing it, we're doing the trials, and some of them are working, some of them are not. Some of the vegetables get too much fungal growth. But we're also growing things like typhus, which is a reed, and the seeds of the reed you can use as a biopuff, filler for duvets, for jackets, instead of fossil fuel things. Anyway, there are ways of re-wetting the lowland peat and still using it to produce things, but we also ought to just re-wet it from themselves up to the surface. And that means putting all those vegetables somewhere else. So we need to think of ways to diversify, decentralize our vegetable production and have every farm producing vegetables. A phased relocation of arable, because we're producing a lot of cereals, and absolutely insanely, as Guy said, producing an incredibly damaging crop, maize, on peat soils, because obviously it's an easy crop to use it, but it's completely damaging to the soil. That should be banned, because it's not carbon beneficial and it's hugely harmful to the soils. So relocating all those things and providing resources to build capacity elsewhere for farmers to be able to do that, to produce field vegetables and fruit, and tackling the barriers. So that's that report. Completely run out of time, and I haven't had B. I was going to talk about Tale of Two Farms. I haven't got time to do that. Just a quick thing, ongoing saga of the farm environmental payments. We've campaigned, many of us campaigned to change the old system of paying farmers just income support to paying farmers for public goods. And we argue public goods included public health, education, as well as nature, environment, climate. And it's happened in England, not in Scotland. In Wales, it sort of happened. Northern Ireland still to be discussed. But the Sustainable Farming Incentive was launched 3 years ago, 2002, with an initial pilot and a scheme last year. But you will all be very aware, it wasn't particularly targeted well for growers. But there was a big rollout last year, and so many farms last year, and so many farms applied that they ran out of money. There was no limit to how much farms could get, so a lot of farms went for the maximum area payments that they could get, used up all the money, and it was a disaster, PR disaster for DEFRA, a disaster for farmers and growers. And the same has happened for the capital grants, which ran out in 3 weeks after he announced the new capital grant scheme at Groundswell. Capital grants, obviously essential for putting in the infrastructure you need, buying trees, maintenance, etc. And countryside stewardship, I haven't got time to go into the detail of that. A lot of farmers are in countryside stewardship, which is a higher tier scheme, means you could do more for nature. And these are running out, a lot of these are running out in winter, and there's nothing to replace them. So all those farmers, either they go bust, they take the hit themselves, sell off their houses or whatever, or they just intensify and take all that land that they've protected for nature back in. So there's a lot of big problems right now when we should be in the golden years of elms. And it's a lot to do with money, but I think there's an awful lot to do with management as well. I will stop there and open for questions.
Thank you, Vicki. That was a brilliant talk, fascinating as expected. If you ever get a chance to go walking with Vicki anywhere, she will point out numerous fascinating bugs that I would have not noticed, so I highly recommend it. Now, I bet there are quite a few questions. We've got about 10 minutes, so yes, I can see 2 hands there. Can you say your name and where you're from, please?
I'm Tommy Ashton from the Brecon Beacons. I was wondering what your take is on introducing predatory insects to manage pests and stuff. So, you know, if you get loads of aphids being like, oh, let's buy a box of ladybirds.
Yes. Yeah, I was going to say,
and, you know, whether you think it's better to foster the natural habitats rather than just introducing a box load of wasps or whatever. But if there were particular insects that you do think would be beneficial to biodiversity, that, you know, rather than just ladybirds and wasps, you're like, this specific breed of hoverfly would be amazing.
Yeah. I mean, you notice my I'm not an absolute expert. I mean, I did do my study on a particular leaf miner, Chrysomya niger, and its wasp predator, but there are many out there. It's an interesting question about whether you shouldn't buy them in. And I know a lot of glasshouse growers do that, and it's partly because they don't want to use pesticides in their glasshouse crops because they're using bumblebees as pollinators, and they buy the bumblebees in. And the instinct in me as a wildlife lover and nature lover is that you build a system that works. And bringing them in, you're probably going to upset that system. And those predators might be eating some beneficials as well. So the best thing is to build the habitats around your farm that will provide them with the right environment. And that means, you know, I don't mean bug hotels, because sometimes they're a little bit twee, used as a sop for people to do what they really should be doing, which is having a really messy garden, and having, wildflowers, diversity, all the things you're probably doing anyway. So I would say my preference would be to build the environment that will allow your predators. But they might need a boost at some point. Lacewing larvae are brilliant, and they're a native species, lacewing larvae, and they're voracious. As you said, all the ladybirds. Rove beetles, I don't know if you can buy rove beetles, but they're brilliant slug control. But what some growers and gardeners I know would probably love would be leopard slugs, that you could get leopard slugs, because they eat other slugs. And they're brilliant, and they're beautiful. As the name suggests, they're leopard-shaped. But, yeah, my instinct is to go for a natural system. But when you've got a very intensive farming system, which probably none of you are doing that, you've got organic systems, but it's very intensive monocultures, that won't work. So, but what I was suggesting, that list of things, that will work, but over time. And you'll have a yield gap, and you'll have problems, which I think our policy environment and our supply chain should be supporting. They should be supporting the transition and supporting the research, supporting the farmer-led research, supporting training and advice. And some corporates do play lip service doing this. Some do a bit more than lip service, but I think they should be doing a lot more, and government.
Thank you. I'm Lydia, also from Mid Wales, and I am wondering if you've seen our ground nesting bee nest under the archway. It's got a beautiful protective bin with some flags.
Do you know what bees they are?
That's what I was going to ask.
I will have a look.
I want to know what bees they are so I can write it on one of the flags and everyone can learn.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, codderbee. They're around. They like gingery and hairy and yeah. There's a rare. The moss codderbee is very rare, but the common codderbee is everywhere. My garden is full of it. They're beautiful though, aren't they? They're really good pollinators, really important. But I will have a look. I can use iNaturalist quite quickly. So if I manage to take a photograph, I'll ID it quite quickly.
Lawrence wanted one, and then.
Oh, so that's perfect.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. Okay. Yeah, brilliant. I will. Anybody who follows me on social media, you know I photograph and show a lot of bugs, so I'll do that as well. All the social medias. Hello.
Hi, I'm Chaz, Darwin Organic in Dorset. Regarding the holy trio, ladybirds, lacewings, hoverflies. So hoverflies we kind of know. Asteraceae, things like that is going to attract them, that's fine. Ladybirds, nettles, early in the season, but we don't really want nettles everywhere around the garden because they're a nuisance. So, first of all, favourable early plant host plants for ladybirds and lacewings.
Yeah.
We have them, we don't know what they're doing or where they're coming from. So is there some, like a particular group of plants that we should focus on for ladybirds and lacewings?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've got them listed in my book, but off the top of my head, I mean, I've got a winter flowering jasmine, which the lacewings seem to like for some reason. But again, that's a flower rather than, you might not want that. But the important thing is also to provide habitats for them to overwinter for the ladybirds. So make sure you've got straw or tubes for them to overwinter, because that's what they'll be doing. But any berry plants, like blueberries, other plants, they'll provide them with overwintering habitat as well. I'm trying to think. My brain's gone completely blank of the best things for these animals. Do you have some? Yarrow, okay. Tansy, yeah, I knew I had that in the book. Tansy. Right. Yeah. Ladybird, so tansy and yarrow. Yeah, I have got a list. My brain is frazzled right now. I'm so sorry. And there's loads of things on the organic gardening and organic website.
So should we buy the book then?
Well, as you've asked such a perfect question, you can have a free copy. And you've embarrassed me that I haven't got the names on top of my head. I'm so bad at plants. I can remember bug names, but not plant names, because I'm not interested. Lawrence.
Vicky, thank you. Which hat? Sheep Grove Trust hat, this question. That was brilliant, thank you. And thanks for talking about the biodiversity in a much wider way, a kind of functional biodiversity, how it can be used on farms. That's brilliant. My question is, sort of links the two things together. So we're working on land use policy, and I did a digital meta-analysis of all the papers on biodiversity loss for the key words, and 96% talked about habitat, obviously, but all of them talked about agrochemicals. So I then put into this AI thing, why is it that the conservation bodies are not putting organic farming, given that agrochemical usage is such a damaging thing to biodiversity, why is it that the conservation bodies in general do not put organic farming right at the centre of every single policy they support and every single land use policy? So I sent it off for the search, and it came back, said, can't find an answer. I have no idea. So can you answer why organic farming is not the centre of land use policy for all the conservation bodies, all the wildlife trusts, and?
No, it's a fair question. And having gone to the wildlife, I've not been in a conservation body before the Wildlife Trust. I worked for Friends of the Earth and ran the Organic Targets Bill campaign, as you well know, Lawrence. So I'm a big fan, but I've also failed organic. I'm very, very aware I've failed on organic. But when I talked to them about this, the Wildlife Trust is 47 different organisations, so there's no dictating from the centre what they support. But they do work with all farmers. So they're trying to bring all farmers into the fold of nature-friendly farming. And they find, and they found it very clearly, if they mention organic, farmers will walk away. And you know this as well as I, it's a problem. It's got a identity, a issue, and I'm being very honest here, and I know it's being recorded, but I truly believe organic is absolutely the way forward, and that's why I did the Organic Targets Bill. But I think there's room for other forms of farming, other types of farming systems like regen, if farmers aren't prepared to take the risks that they think there are in organic systems. And that means that when a conservation group starts to work with the farmers in their area to make sure that nature is starting to be protected in that area, and you've got green corridors, space for nature, if they start only talking about organic, then they will lose their audience. So they talk about organic as part of a system and as you know, Lawrence, also we also campaign very hard for the ban on neonics, neonicotinoid insecticides. So we do talk about insecticides, but it's as part of a whole system of approaches. So I haven't got the perfect answer for you, Lawrence.
Well, just one follow-up, if I may. I mean, I get that, I understand that, and I understand...
No book for Lawrence.
But, yeah. Isn't it true there's a kind of conspiracy of silence around terms like regenerative, which hide the fact that most regenerative systems rely not just on glyphosate, but also on other fungicides and relatively high use of nitrogen fertilizers, all of which, whatever you do in terms of bugs and hedgerows and all those other things, all of which work against the kinds of things that you're recommending. Isn't there really a conspiracy? Shouldn't we have more transparency and honesty from
I think we're very clear in all our materials at the Wildlife Trust. I haven't looked at the RSPB or National Trust lately, but the Wildlife Trust is very clear. Pesticides are a big part of the problem. We talk about them. We campaign for the ban on neonics, and we talk about nature-friendly farming systems which use none or less or very targeted, I guess, chemicals. But we talk about it a lot in our materials. And the report that I showed you on regen farming, it gives a big plug to organic in there. It's not in the cover, you might not agree with that, but it's in there. And it talks about regenerative agroecological farming. It is what it is to be able to speak to an audience which isn't like you. I'm speaking to the converted here, which is great, but we need to speak to the unconverted. And that's a very difficult thing to do.
Okay, I've just got a small-scale policy question.
Oh, yeah?
You were mentioning about tansy and other herbaceous plants for overwintering. Are you suggesting if I've got those, I should cut them down in the spring then? They should be allowed to stay in place?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
to provide the host.
in February or something like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, do. And allow them to seed if you can.
Yeah.
And if you can't allow them to seed, well, if you can protect them, if you don't want the seed to spread, but you can protect them and take the seeds yourself.
Okay. And leopard slugs eat vegetables, do they?
I thought they were carnivorous, so they're only eating other insects and particularly other slugs, which is what attracted me to the first place. You can buy nematodes, talking about buying things online. I've heard mixed reports of the nematode, nemaslug, buying the spores and you put them in water and then you spread them on and they get rid of your slugs and snails, but I've heard mixed response from that. Yeah. Hi.
In relation to talking about regenerative, could we turn it around to make a positive? Do you have any recommendations for how we can, any sort of policy measures or things we can support to make sure that regenerative farming really means something worthwhile?
That's a really good question. We should have, I mean, what I say in my report is that we should have a set of standards, but that's really difficult. I mean, organic standard developed over many decades with a lot of brilliant people developing them, learning from them, making mistakes, learning from those mistakes, and their whole farm. So you could argue, why do we need another one? And that could take as long because there's so many arguments. Part of me thinks we're not going to get a regen standard because there are such disputes. But at the same time, we're already getting them. I mean, don't know if you were at Groundswell, but I think it's Regenerist. Is it Regenerist? The one that Waitrose is doing with Gabe Brown, the guru of regen. Is it Generist? Regenified. I've said that before. I'm sorry, I'm getting old. It's Regenified. And that's got a set of standards, which I did look at. They looked interesting, but you can immediately get certified after the first stage, so I was slightly worried about that. You know, the thing about organic is you have a conversion period, which is very well known, and then you're organic, and you're doing everything from then on right. That should be true of any standard that consumers are believing to be giving them a values-based system. And ideally, it would include things like living wage for workers and things like that, you know. Hi.
Hi. Idris. So my name is Idris, and we live in Salford.
Excellent. Hi, Idris.
So how does pollen get stuck to feet? The feet on bees?
That's a really good question. You know, bees I mean, they're the thing that make this world go round. You know, we wouldn't have strawberries, we wouldn't have an awful lot of vegetables and all sorts if we didn't have bees and other pollinators. But the pollen, it sits in the middle of the flower. So you've probably seen bees going into a flower, haven't you? And do you ever listen to them? Because sometimes some bees do this thing called buzz pollination. And they change the sound of their pollen. Next time you're looking at bees, maybe bumblebees, you know, the big ones, going into a flower, and they'll change the sound of their wings to shake more pollen off. And then they can put it on the hairs on their legs, and then they get this pollen sac on their legs. There are some bees that don't have sacs on their legs. They put it on their tummy. They've got hairs under their tummy. I took photographs, and what's they called? I can't remember the name. Anyway, I put them on social media, or I can tell you afterwards, I'll find it. So they have hairs on their tummy, and the pollen sits on their tummy. So they've got a big yellow tummy. But that's how they transport it when they go to another flower. And the pollen sits on the other flower and fertilizes that flower. So then it can produce a fruit. And I've been watching that. I don't know, do you grow anything yourself? You grow some tomatoes, maybe? Or?
No. Not by myself.
Yeah, I think your family does, yeah? Brilliant. You can watch them coming, and it's such a satisfying thing when you can see it happening, and you know you're going to get a tomato from that very flower, and I follow the flowers. I've been doing that all summer in the heat. Thank you, Idris. That was a very good question.
Very good question. Thank you.
Okay.
Well done.
It's a good question.
Hello, my name's Ian. I was just wondering, sort of in the vein of regen agriculture and getting people to move more towards organic and why they leave the room.
Yeah.
And is the fundamental problem there that they're trying to operate
Yes.
more? Regen agriculture is more easy for large corporations to run, big-scale farming, and they don't want to bring in additional labour. Yeah. So how do we challenge that system, encourage them to move to using more labour on the land, and also do we need to go therefore for the I kind of firmly believe that we can't crack organic until we deal with rent control and making it so that the consumer actually has
afford,
the ability to pay for food. It should be 30. We should have a big campaign about giving people 30% of their income
food.
spend on food, and until we crack that, we can't get into regen. You know, they're just not going to have that conversation.
I think that's a really, really good question and point, because it's about the whole economic system is skewed up to favour very large scale, uniform, cheap raw materials from wherever around the world. You know, it's commodities that a lot of our farmers are producing, and they're competing with commodity producers across the world, South America, North America, and that's very difficult nut to crack. One of the things that I ran with many others was a trade campaign after Brexit to try and get the government to recognise we need core standards that they will not go below in order for our farmers not to be competing with farmers overseas who have lower labour, lower environmental standards, animal welfare standards. And we didn't win that. We won a pathetic concession, so we're still fighting that battle. But you're absolutely right. The economic system is set up to favour low-cost raw materials for highly processed and processed foods. And I think the whole thing about rent control, I mean, I worked at Sustain, and they have a whole campaign around food poverty, income, you know, changing the income situation so people can afford agroecologically produced food. And they've got a whole program of work called Bridging the Gap, which is worth you looking at. It's on their website, and they've done loads of pilots, which land workers, I'm sure, are involved in, and many others. And George is over there. She might be able to tell you about it. She's sitting there. Bridging the Gap is about finding where you need to put different ways, putting the money in the system so the agroecological farmer can stay agroecological, organic ideally. A lot of the pilots are organic, and the consumer can afford it. A low-income consumer afford it. Because at the moment, it's very difficult to have evidence to say what that should look like. But some of it will be rent control and energy costs and all the other things and low-wage gig economy. I used to work at War on Want, and you know, this is a major part of the problem of society at the moment, that people are valuing the wrong things. So another good question. You can have the book if you want. But it's big picture stuff here, and apologies if I'm a bit confused, because doing both subjects in a very short amount of time is quite tricky, but there's a lot of stuff on our website. I write blogs a lot, which sort of summarise some of this stuff. But on bugs, I'm writing a new book, so I'll get better.
Thank you so much, Vicki. You've done the miraculous in